Aloha. Welcome to Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers, interviews with people who have special insights into public and private education from preschool all the way through higher education. I'm Jim Sean, your host. We're live streaming every Wednesday at about noon, and then we post these interviews on YouTube and the Hawaii Educational Policy Center. Our guest today, looking at democracy and the importance of it in education, is Dr. Lila Berg, or rather, Representative Lila Berg. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And you have been a principal. Did you start as a principal in education?
No, I wanted to. I realized leadership was always something that I really enjoyed. I actually started as a teacher.
Okay.
And not with the intention of becoming an educator, but because it was a fallback when I was going to college and I had to get out of college. And I say that kind of facetiously because I think sometimes the teaching profession is regarded as something you do until something else comes along.
Right.
Once I became a teacher in Washington, D.C., as a matter of fact, I realized that I was happier. I needed to run schools where teachers who loved to teach could teach.
Okay.
I was okay teaching.
So what did you teach?
I taught in predominantly 95% African-American neighborhood. I taught German and English. Because at that time—
In high school?
In middle school.
Middle school, oh.
Right, there was a requirement, in the 70s and 80s that foreign language was taught in middle school and high schools.
Uh-huh.
And when I came back to Hawaii and eventually became principal at Kailua Intermediate School, it was still a requirement that there was a language or a fine arts credit, which now has completely disappeared.
Uh-huh.
And perhaps that background that I had of falling into education as a teacher, realizing that I loved to run schools and leadership, and then my familiarity in Virginia and Washington, D.C. at the school level, and then also back in Hawaii as vice principal at Molokai, principal at Kailua Intermediate School, I began to really see that education truly is the foundation of our society. Sounds a little, sarcastic, but it is. Education is the profession that prepares every other profession.
So your experience is that you didn't intentionally say education is going to be my profession. You kind of drifted, fell into, sort of chose it, but through the experience you learned something about yourself and about that profession, right?
Absolutely, and I learned a lot about Hawaii.
Uh-huh.
So my parents are European and Asian. I grew up speaking French and German, predominantly educated in Europe. In Hawaii, I was raised, of course, and then on the continent, U.S. continent. But when I came home and joined the profession of education, I learned so much more about Hawaii and Hawaii's peoples and the challenges that we have in such a multi-ethnic demographic community that we have, that it was invaluable. And it really, I see, set the foundation for all of my passion and obsession now with civic education as well.
So you did go through a transition from the classroom to the school as being a principal. Did teaching prepare you well for being a principal and that kind of leadership? Or is it a natural flow, or is it really something different?
I think really good teachers are made.
Uh-huh.
They're born, certainly, with the characteristic of service and compassion and empathy. But really, good teachers can take that character and become good facilitators of learning.
Uh-huh.
I was really fortunate because I had some great mentors, and they taught me what not to do.
Uh-huh.
I had to figure out what to do.
Yes.
When I became started teaching at Kailua High School, English and German, moved to Molokai.
Molokai?
Yeah,
wow.
It was awesome. It's the only island that I can sleep.
Oh.
The only place in the world I can sleep, because there's an understanding of the importance of community, not just the importance, there's an understanding and an actual willingness of the community to participate in the education of their child.
Uh-huh.
Those are big words, and I don't think the community looks at it that way. But what I learned on Molokai is that the growth and development of a child is everyone's responsibility, and they look at it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually I became the vice principal there, and that was really challenging because it was the time of Chapter 19,
Oh, yes.
and I was this
Well,
young woman
tell
from
us
Honolulu.
what Chapter 19 is, right?
Chapter 19 came in the early 80s as the discipline code.
The discipline code for the...
It was not only policy, it also laid out the infractions, it laid out the issues, and what the consequences could be.
For students.
For students, yes. So you could no longer be in a fight and have it considered just a fight.
Yes.
It was assault, it was harassment, could be considered a misdemeanor. The police could be involved.
Mm-hmm.
So it took a lot of decision making at the school level from the administrator as to what to classify the activity or the event between children or of the child, and then whether or not to involve the police. And on Molokai, there's only one high school, one middle school, in the middle of the island. So on both ends of the island, the families have no transportation to pick up their child if they're suspended.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to figure out what were the consequences that would be relevant to an action. And most of the kids, I mean, even in high schools nowadays, they're just kolohe. They're mischievous, they're bored.
Yes.
School is irrelevant to them, and so they find other ways to be creative.
Yes.
And so on Molokai, what I found is if I worked with the community and worked with parents, we could reduce the boredom in the schools, certainly, but we could reduce also the mischievousness of kids. Kids are going to be kids.
Mm-hmm.
How do we channel that energy into creativity? So we had murals and we had projects. Long before service learning became the buzzword, we were doing projects already. I came back to Kailua Intermediate as the principal with that learning from the neighbor islands, and was very blessed to be in a school where the administrative advisory council was made up of department heads. I was the youngest principal in the state at the time, and I learned to listen on Molokai. I learned to listen to my colleagues, to the community, to kids. And when I got to Kailua Intermediate, that listening skills came in handy because the administrative council was the powerhouse of the school. They made the decisions actually through consensus, which after Kailua Intermediate I never experienced anywhere else, where they were able to decide among themselves who was going to get the most money this year. Was it math textbooks? Was it the musical instruments? Was it extracurricular programs? So we actually were the first nationally recognized middle school and accredited middle school in Hawaii at that time.
So this power distribution at the school level, right? You know, there's obviously a community context, right? But many principals believe, and collective bargaining and other things lead one to believe that the principal is the head of the school and not necessarily on a committee. Was that a unique situation of yours, you think, within the system? Did it just happen that you were open to that, but if you wanted to assert your principalness, could you have?
Of course. In fact, I was always the head.
Yes.
I was always the titular head, at least. And I was willing to take that responsibility and the authority. At the same time, what I learned on Molokai about working with people, and it goes beyond team building. It was really listening and hearing beyond what they were saying and having a common vision. It sounds so trite, but we agreed on what our purpose was there as a middle school. And there were times when I did have to exercise, authority, if you will. And oftentimes that my superintendent at the time had a conversation with me, never scolded me, but asked me questions that caused me to think about my actions. It was before SCBM, School Community-Based Management. We had a strong community participation program, strong PTSA, and I didn't want to jeopardize the community's conversation with me by putting a structure in.
So at some point, this wonderful experience, something put into your mind, maybe I should run for the legislature.
Not then.
Not then, no.
Not at all. In fact, I didn't have any inkling to run for the legislature until maybe about 10 years ago when my son challenged me.
Uh-huh.
So after Kailua Intermediate, and I was given some options, I resigned from the DOE and went to teach at the University of Hawaii in the College of Ed,
Okay.
preparing teachers.
Okay.
I was finishing up my doctorate
Uh-huh.
in teacher education, and came across this program called Kids Voting, national program, civic education program, and we can talk about that as well and how that got started. But essentially, my experiences in that nonprofit world led me to understand more about community, volunteerism, the role that schools have in the community, and vice versa. And I ran for office because I came home one day from a national conference complaining about the legislature and their lack of understanding and support. And my son challenged me to run for office.
And
how
old was he then?
He was 17.
He was 17.
Senior in high
so,
school.
Okay, so
And he had
put
heard
up
me
right, yeah.
talking about Constitution and rights and community engagement, and he said, either run for office or shut up.
Uh-huh. So the wheels
Through
started...
the mouths of babes, right?
The wheels started turning.
Yes.
And eventually you did run for office.
Actually, that was in May, and I filed in June and won the election in November.
And what part of the state were you representing?
At that time it was called the 18th District, so it's from Kahala Mall to Hawaii Kai, Costco.
Okay.
And there hadn't been a Democrat in that position for 25 years.
Uh-huh.
A lovely lady was the incumbent, and I decided to run on the principles of running, not against her, but for what I could offer and for community engagement.
Okay.
And I walked a lot.
Okay. You walk the walk and talk the
Yeah,
talk,
had
and we've been talking with Lila Berg, who is a doctor, a former principal, a legislator, and a community organizer. And we'll be back in 1 minute.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I'd like to bring on guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with Think Tech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island. I work in the ER there. But on Tuesday afternoons, I get to come and spend 45 minutes to an hour with Jay Fidel and the Think Tech staff. They're terrific professionals. They help us to bring some of the leading cutting-edge topics here across our state to you. So you can join us at our show on healthcare in Hawaii to talk with leaders from across all the spectrum of health in our state, or you can join us for any other show where we talk about economic development or tourism or some really eclectic programs too. So really, we'd love to see you here on our show. Thanks for joining us and thanks for supporting us.
Aloha, welcome back to Education Movers, Shakers, Reformers. We're talking with Dr. Lila Berg about her journey through many different realms, and you've now arrived at the legislature, right? And,
Yes.
And you're on the Legislative Education Committee. That's a different world than being a principal, is it not?
It's hugely different. And I think in particular, while I was at the legislature, because I was the vice chair of education, it was a surprise to them that someone really understood education from the inside. So when I was there, it was interesting because my colleagues, my former colleagues, would rely on me to give them the truth, or at least to share my perspectives on what I thought was the truth. And when the testifiers would come from the Department of Education, they couldn't fudge it.
Right.
You know, because I knew what happens in classrooms, on the neighbor islands, you know, and in administration.
But did you find the willingness to fudge?
I found a familiarity with how they would testify.
Yes.
And so I would actually ask them to just tell me what you want to say. I can read the testimony.
Yes.
So I would be much more interested in having a dialogue with people about why they thought something was important and how it fit into the larger picture of education, as opposed to how do you support this bill.
Right.
And so it became very challenging for me because the habit is to look at whether a bill has merit as opposed to how a bill fits into the bigger vision and mission
Right.
of the content field,
Right, right.
whether it's transportation or CPC or environment.
Yeah.
And people get very attached to a bill as opposed to
Yes.
the vision.
This is my bill.
Yes, yeah. In fact, that's sort of why I decided to run for lieutenant governor several terms afterward, because it became too much of an effort to fight something as opposed to create something.
Well, in Hawaii system being one district for the entire state, the only state that's like this, you have a constitutionally established Board of Ed, right? But you also have these education committees that control all the money and influence and policy and whatnot. It seems to me that a legislative committee in some ways has more actual power than the Board of Education. Did you find that you were sort of sitting on an elected Board of Education, essentially?
I don't know if that's so true
Okay.
from the perspective of if I felt had the authority, because there's a reluctance at the legislature to put policy in place to require the DOE to do anything, which I find is interesting because the DOE, Department of Education, is one of 12 functioning departments, like the Department of Ag, Department of Health, Department of Land and Natural Resources. And every one of those state functional departments has a plan. The Department of Education is the only one that operates as if it is autonomous. And in a way that's great. At the same time, the legislature is reluctant to mandate the DOE to do anything, and the Board of Education is waiting, as in the past at least, has been waiting for marching orders from the DOE. So there was this confusion as to who makes policy. And the legislature's function is to fund the requests and the plan from the Department of Education. The Board of Education is responsible for creating the framework and the policies, therefore, that guide what happens in the Department of Education, not vice versa.
So if we're talking about an initiative such as more and better and more meaningful citizenship education,
Civic
education or whatever, it's not really clear whose responsibility is to take this up and run with it if everybody's deferring to each other.
I think it depends on how you look at civic engagement or civic education or citizenship education. If it is looked at as a content, like science and social studies,
A course.
a course, a field, and it is a field of study. There is information, there are skills and dispositions that are absolutely attributed to civic education, just like math skills,
Right.
like language arts skills. However, the purpose of public education has always been to create an informed citizenry who can participate in self-governance. That's the form of our democracy.
Say that again. The purpose.
The purpose of education is to engender and create an informed citizenry so they can participate in the form of democracy that we have in America, which is self-governance. In fact, Act 51 even takes that further, that the purpose of education is no less than the endowment of human culture, so that each generation moves further towards sustainability, compassion, and peace. Huge words, but really if we look at the purpose of public schools, it is more than to prepare young people for jobs.
Yes.
It is more than to get them into college. Okay, we've had that conversation ad nauseum. And now the DOE has put in around the country that the purpose of education is also citizenship, responsibility, becoming part of civil society. But we become so accustomed in school systems to doing content for jobs, content for college, that we assume that the civic responsibility will be caught. So if kids are obedient in school, they'll obey the law. If they don't know what the law is, how can they obey it?
Yes.
If kids participate in school and after-school sports and activities and clubs, they'll be volunteering in the community. There's not necessarily that transfer at all. And to schools' credit, they have put in service learning as a requirement for graduation or for the certain special kind of certificate to graduate. But there is no correlation that just because kids do that in school, they will do it when they grow up. And we can see in the community, especially in Hawaii, that the dependence on nonprofits to fill in the gaps that public services don't have, schooling, health, environmental concerns, there is no expectation that from the public that the state is going to fund everything, so nonprofits step in. But who's part of the nonprofits? And I'd like to change that nonprofit doesn't mean we don't make any profit. It means that that's not the focus. Money is not the focus of our work.
So then you left the ledge and you ran for lieutenant governor and...
God saved me.
Yes, yes. And you found something meaningful to do, which was to create this organization to promote young people voting.
Actually, that was done way before I ran for office.
Okay.
So 1996, kids voting came into existence with pilot schools in Baldwin Complex on Maui and Farrington Complex in Kalihi.
So it was actually running through the stream of the public education system.
Definitely.
Okay.
Always operated, implemented by the community. Rotarians statewide staffed the polling sites.
Okay.
American Savings at that time was a corporate sponsor to provide the public relations materials. JCs would carry the ballots from the airport to the tabulation.
So we're talking high school only?
Kindergarten through grade 12.
Kindergarten through grade 12.
Yes.
They're all voting. And what are they voting on?
They voted on the general election for the same candidates that their parents did.
Okay, okay.
So we replicated the ballots, only ours were colorful. Ours had pictures. And we also put in ballot issues per island.
Okay.
So the water issues on Maui are not the same as on Kauai, but the Kauai had transportation problems, for instance. So the kids would, on election day, go to the polling sites and vote on the same candidates as their parents. They would, ballots would be tabulated, and we would report the kids' voting results. It became unsustainable at 238 polling sites. So we put it online. And now it's an online ballot. And last year we were 18 years old. And so we went to a group of high school kids and asked them, is this relevant to you? Because the high school numbers were very in voting. We know by grade what the percentage of turnout is. And the high school kids told us they wanted to change the name. So it became We Vote Hawaii instead of kids voting.
Right, because they're not kids anymore.
No, and the intention really was always the trickle-up effect. We want the young people to instigate a movement and celebrate this voting as a citizenship example in our democracy and compel the adults to go and vote.
So in the schools, I'm assuming that many teachers were preparing students, taking time from other things to prepare them for this voting in some respect, right?
Yeah, actually, the good teachers, and good meaning the effective teachers, integrated citizenship, civic education, voting within their classroom. So we had teachers in math classes doing surveys that they could tabulate and graph and interviews in language arts classes. Alpha Delta Kappa, International Women's Sorority, became our spine and our backbone. So those are teachers, principals in school level that became our ambassadors for We Vote Hawaii.
Was it because middle and high school you teach a subject area and not everything like in elementary? Do you think that compartmentalization worked against, to some extent, a more rigorous engagement preparation for voting for kids?
Most definitely the compartmentalization of subjects from middle school on has, I think, a detrimental effect in the holistic learning for young people. You know, all of us learn in many different ways.
Yes.
And so now, when we talk about citizenship education or preparing young people for the world, certainly, and with the testing issues, when they only test math and language arts, even with STEM, and I think it's great to have a focus on science and technology, but why do we use science and technology, and for what, and in the benefit of whom? Those are ethical questions that teachers sometimes shy away from, and they're also qualitative answers that can't be measured, and so they don't get included in other content areas. Social studies becomes the focal point.
Well, also, what we're talking about is someone up through the graduation of high school and nothing else. That 16 through 26-year-old where habits of mind, the frontal lobe develops, as we're told, decision-making happens. It drops off upon graduation. You know, I used to, a long time ago, I was prepared to be a music teacher. And when my son went through high school, on the last concert of the year, the music teacher would come out and say, it's great you're all here. We're celebrating, you know, for some of the seniors here are the seniors, they stand up. But he pointed out something sad. This may be the last time any of them play an instrument, right? And that's because that passing of the baton in appropriate ways for music engagement ends at public high schools or even private high schools. And so it seems to me that there's a role for that baton being passed off to community colleges, four-year colleges, others that have not seen this as a responsibility.
Yes, and again, there is content,
Yes.
right? It is a discipline. Maybe it fits more comfortably in social studies than it does in science and math or language arts. But the purpose of schools, all schools, even trade schools, I think is to engage our young people in this place called society. And how do you contribute? How do you use your talents and your skills? And if you don't know what they are, find out. That's the purpose of schools. Find out what you can do, what you love to do, and let's give you opportunities to practice it in the real world. We have our Interact clubs, which are the young Rotarians in Kiwanis and Key clubs. So many service clubs. The young people are engaged in society, but there's not a connection.
We will talk about those connections and where we go after this short break. We'll be back in a minute.
Okay, this is Think Tech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy. 4 to 5 p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Oh, here we go. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Lila Berg about civic education in the schools and the purpose of schooling and preparing people to be citizens and good decision makers. So now, we know we have one of the lowest voter turnouts. A recent election, even among the teachers, showed a very, a small minority actually voted for HSTA president of the teachers union, right? Engagement, voting, and it's more than voting, it's, being involved, seems to be a difficult problem for upcoming generations. What the heck are we going to do about it? We talk about it, we wring our hands about it, we bemoan it. What do we do?
I think there are other questions to ask.
Okay.
And those of us who believe deeply in the public will, and the democratic processes are going to be the ones who are out there screaming and shouting. I think the question is not what are we going to do about the low voting rate, or even how are we going to get people to vote. I think the question has to do with helping people understand that voting matters. Because I don't believe people are apathetic. They either don't know how to vote because they weren't taught, and that was part of what We Vote Hawaii is about.
Right.
I believe people feel that they don't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the point? When people would say, well, I don't think we should, who cares if we vote for president because the decision is made already beforehand. Okay, that's a bigger arena. Locally, it matters who we get in office because they make laws and they make decisions that that we may not agree with. So the question is, how do we have people understand the role that they have so that voting becomes one of the many actions that they know they can take to make an influence?
Well, another way to look at it is voting is a symptom of one's engagement, knowledge, action in the community as well. And I do think that people give themselves an unfortunate permission not to pay attention. I remember when I was running for the legislature, lots of people would claim, oh, it's so complicated to figure out who's running for this and all these offices. They have no idea compared to the mainland where you have many more levels, of elections and complications and jurisdictions of government. But people memorize hundreds of songs and lyrics to songs, right? You cannot tell me that someone cannot learn the basic structure of government. So part of it, seems to me, is that somehow we've characterized the public realm and government and elections and politics as a soiled, almost dirty realm. I proudly do not pay attention to politics. I will not lower myself to this. Do you have anything to say about motivation and attitudes?
Well, you made a really interesting analogy. Music sings to your heart. Music touches your heart.
Right.
Music makes you happy, sad. It's emotional. Politics makes you emotional too. However, I have really never met anybody who is happy when they're talking about anything political.
Really?
They love to discuss and debate on topics. But really, when you learn a song, it's because it's meaningful to you. Right? It's a memory of something that's special, that touches your heart. Politics and civic engagement, and we're talking not only political engagement, but also being of service in the community and volunteerism and altruism, doesn't always sing to your heart. And so the challenge of nonprofits to raise the awareness is what touches you.
What touches you?
What makes you feel that you are valuable, that it matters, that you matter.
Yes.
And so much of when we talk about voting is people feel they don't matter.
Right.
And they're treated like they don't matter. Going back to the schools again, the most successful schools are the ones where the principals, I believe, as the KED leader, feels autonomous and strong enough and confident enough to go to the community and say, this is my vision, this is what I would like to do, come along with me. So it's complicated because of the power structures that exist.
Well, even in the school, you have these young adults, and we almost never ask them to help run the school. We almost never ask them, what color are we going to paint the walls? Even something small aesthetic like that. What should we plant in front, right? You know,
Yes.
and it seems to me that we've created generations of passive, you know, folks that we educate, as opposed to participating.
Educare.
Educate or whatever.
To draw forth from within.
Okay, there you go. Right, right.
Yes, and you know, it really pains me as a former school activities coordinator and student council advisor that kids are not running for office at the school level.
Yes, yes.
In fact, some I
Well,
found
what
out
would
last
they
year.
do if they won, you know?
That too.
We don't give them anything,
Right.
really. We can choose which elective everybody's going to get. Whoa, well, that would be interesting. you
So
know,
at a national level, and I'm
Yes.
involved with a lot of national initiatives for civic engagement and learning, it's encouraging schools to see that higher level thinking skills, 21st century skills, all the stuff that we think are important for kids in their head can actually be instigated, motivated, and inspired by civic engagement.
So we can teach courses with content, social studies, democracy in America, whatever that is. But it seems to me that with music in some respects, in STEM, in project-based learning and service learning, these are things that surround the school rather than flow only out of the school. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about you know, where we place our time and talent and treasure in trying to improve things. Is it another course? Is it more professional development for the teacher in the course? Or is it more of a community-driven one that also relates to higher education and others?
That's a rhetorical question you're asking me.
Well, sure.
Of course,
yeah.
it's community.
Yeah.
But your question, though, of where do we place the value and the attention?
Yes.
It's in the young people's preparation.
Okay.
Schools are not for the convenience at the moment for young people. And this is not a statement against unions and a statement against schedules and required courses. This is really about why are we here? And if we are here to prepare young people for their role in society, what does that look like? Even music and art that have been just totally eliminated.
Yes.
Foreign languages. How do our young people become a global citizen if all they believe is that the world should speak English?
Right.
And if math and music and art are the modes of learning and the energies that some people have, not just talent, where's the role of that?
Well, you know, it also has to do with whether there are mentors and groups that will stimulate students to take the ball and run with it. There was a story in Kaleo at the university where a class decided to put other language labeling around the campus.
How cool.
Yeah. Now, the Board of Regents didn't think of that. You know, the university didn't think of that. They want to think of themselves as multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilinguistic. It was the students who did it, right? I think that's great, but I also think that there has to be an environment maybe where the students are, run with it. Who's going to say no?
So along those lines,
Yeah.
because there are social studies classes,
Yes.
within the social studies classes, where are they having debates? Are they talking about controversial issues?
Yes.
And teaching the young people how to speak with one another. How do you reach consensus? That's something that really was not evident in the legislature.
So if you were going to assemble a group of folks, which you may be doing, to address this issue, what are the kind of folks you would want in that room to begin that conversation?
I would want people who have a joy in life and who have a belief that we are here for the purpose of preparing our young people.
Okay.
And then we need media people, we need private school people, we need folks that work at the national level, nonprofit conversations, we need school level people for the first initial conversation, because the decision really has to be who cares? Who wants this? It can be you or me.
And the folks are looking at the Maryknoll graphic right now, which is an engagement model.
This was a rally that Maryknoll School put together, kindergarten through grade 12, to introduce the candidates running for state office to the student body, because they valued that the students are going to be voting.
Yes.
So one day, and it was great for the candidates, it was great for the kids, the cheerleaders, there was some energy and spirit.
Yes.
I think one of the opportunities we have and challenges and tasks is how do we make civic education and civic engagement sexy?
Okay. We need a song.
We need we have a kids voting song.
Okay.
We need something that says, yes, you matter, this is exciting and colorful, and let's be part of something bigger.
Uh-huh.
Let's be part of making society someplace where we all want to live.
This kind of movement, this kind of excitement will require legislative action, Board of Ed action, other kinds of actions, maybe Board of Regents actions as well. Do you think that there's the possibility of creating a menu of tools that we can grab onto and push through the system?
There are lots of tools available. In
Okay.
fact, the campaign on the civic mission of schools, the organization that I belong with is the National Center for Civic Education and Learning, Education Commission of the States. There are a lot of organizations at a national level that have assembled what works in other states.
Okay.
So there are resources out there. What really is required in Hawaii is the will and the willpower and the willingness of our policymaking boards to set down a policy. If the Board of Education, and I invite the Board of Education to have that conversation among themselves, how would they frame a policy that would encourage, urge, require the Department of Education to integrate civic engagement in their classrooms? Then the legislature would see there's a policy in place. The DOE has to figure out what that would look like. There's so many things going on already. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. It has to be able to stand forward and say, this is what we're doing. And that's what I'm looking for. I'd like a gathering of people to compel the conversations.
Yes.
What is it we want, and this is what we're doing.
So it probably will take some money, some time, some talent, the time, talent, and treasure part to be brought to the table with a higher level of priority, I guess.
Yeah, you know, I don't think it doesn't take a lot of money to have a conversation at a school level on what are we doing to enhance the civic engagement of our young people, or are we even focused on that? Those are internal conversations that happen within organizations, that could happen within organizations. And again, like civic engagement, civic education is not an extra.
Right.
Our education should emanate from that, and then it becomes an enhancement.
Well, those are inspiring and wise thoughts from someone who's thought an awful lot about
And go
it.
vote, register to vote.
And go vote and do more than vote. So we've been talking about the journey that Dr. Berg has gone through to be this enormously important advocate for understanding what public schools are all about. This is Think Tech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. I'm Jim Sean. We're here every Wednesday at noon. This show, as others, will be posted on YouTube and the Hawaii Educational Policy Center. We'll see you next week.